Hello, welcome to the April 2016 edition of CGov's The Parish Line. We cover the events, programs, and policies of the Calcasieu Parish Police Jury. On this month's program, we will take a look at the Parish Transportation Initiative, learn about a new ordinance passed by the Police Jury to regulate door-to-door peddling, and get details on new guidelines for workforce housing in the parish. First, historic floods in western Calcasieu devastated homes, camps, and businesses last month. Margaret Higgins was there to see parish agencies respond.
March brought torrential rainfall to parts of southwest Louisiana and southeast Texas, resulting in major flooding on the Sabine River. Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness was one of the many agencies helping with the rescue and recovery efforts. Emergency Response Coordinator Rob Daughtry has the details.
We have some mottos: prepare, plan, and protect, and that was our major functions in preparing and planning for this event. It's not like a hurricane that it's here all of a sudden. We had a lot of preparation time, a lot of preparing plans and things like that. So we were able to get the information out, meet with the emergency responders and make a plan and stick to that plan, and it worked out really well. This is one of the very first incidents that we had a very robust preparation and planning before it actually happened, and that way it allowed us to work together a whole lot better as far as communications. We did something we had never done before and got everybody on one common channel. Sheriff's Office, Public Works, our office, the fire departments, everyone was on one channel. So anytime anybody needed something, all they had to do was call on the radio and it was handled. But it also gave the community, our emergency responders, the situational awareness of what actually was going on at that situation. So we initiated that very soon in the incident, and it worked out real well for all of us. We were really concerned at the very beginning that a lot of people were going to stay, and we knew that the water was going to get up a lot higher than it had ever had in the past, and that was a really concern for us. And there were a lot of people that did stay. And as the water started to rise and it started getting into their properties that they had never gotten in before, they opted to evacuate. And there were a whole lot of people that evacuated when we asked them to. I remember we were having a meeting, and when we told them the flood of 1989, I think it was going to be 5 to 6 feet higher, the light came on a lot of people and it said, we're going to go pack. And they actually left the meeting while we were meeting with them. So I said, those people are taking the warning. But there was those that opted not to. And what's best about this event is that we had no fatalities and no injuries.
Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Office, Civil Division, and Law Enforcement Commander Vic Salvador was operating from their mobile command unit during the flood and explains their part as the event was unfolding.
We have a large number of deputies assigned to work patrol enforcement duties on the roads. We also have a marine response unit that is working to do rescue in the areas that are flooded. Our marine unit has 7 aluminum boats that are motorized. We have some special equipment for search and rescue. We have high water vehicles for the areas that we can get into to remove people from their homes and to bring them to safety and shuttle them from the road to shelters.
The Starks area, including Alligator Park, was hit hard by the flood.
It was kind of unique that we had various different stages of flooding. We knew that when the water got to the highest at the Deweyville gauge, then that was going to be the highest of the northern part of Starks because the water was there. And it took about 24 hours for it to trickle on down to the other parts of Benton and stuff like that. I mean, we always gauge a lot of the stuff in the Alligator Park area is fairly low. We get a lot of flooding there just on severe thunderstorms. But they took a very major hit, in one of the deeper areas of concern that we had is in that area. So the Alligator Park itself took substantial damage because it was in the deeper part of the the flood waters. And as you come down from Starks, you think about, DeQuincy's real high, and you get into Lake Charles, and then you get to South Lake Charles, it's all going downhill, and it's the same way in Starks. Starks is a whole lot higher in places than it is in Vinton, but there are a lot of low spots that the water can accumulate in.
Working together is the key to recovery.
The churches in this area have been wonderful in providing support not just to the residents but also to law enforcement. We couldn't perform this task without the assistance of those volunteers, of the National Guard, Wildlife and Fisheries, the state police, the fire departments here locally and from Sulphur and Lake Charles, the Department of Transportation, Public Works with the police jury, the Office of Homeland Security. We've been working together as a team to make this a successful task, and we are grateful as the Sheriff's Office for all that help. We couldn't do this job without the assistance of all those people.
Working together with the people that came out and helped us with it, not only the emergency responders who did a fantastic job, they spent numerous hours out there helping out and doing what needed to get done and taking care of the situation, but also the community. It's really surprised me how well that community, the Starks and the Vinton area, pulled together and actually handled the majority of the problems that we have had in the past. And actually we're doing it. We did not have to ask to set up a shelter. They had already set them up. We didn't ask for feeding stations. They set them up. So like they were reading our minds and doing what we needed them to do before we even had to ask. And I think it brought the Vinton community a lot closer, and it gave me a big respect for the people of that part of our parish, for them to just step up to the plate and as the comedians say, get her done. They were able to get it done, and that was the main thing that really impressed me with the people of Vinton and the Starks area that was taking care of business.
For the Parish Line, I'm Margaret Higgins.
For a recap of the Sabine River's historic flooding event, visit the Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness Facebook site at facebook.com/Calcasieu Emergency Notification. As the floods subsided, the recovery efforts began, including the grim task of locating caskets that floated away from area cemeteries. Molly Morgan has details.
The recent flooding of the Sabine River disrupted many of our residents' lives and homes. Throughout the recovery phase, Public Works has been hard at work helping to restore some kind of normalcy to our community. Assistant Public Works Director Teresa Champeau has more.
One of the main projects we're working on right now is assisting the coroner with the identification and recovery of vaults that were disrupted through the flooding. We have a crew working with him, directly with him daily, to identify where those are, where they need to be, so that they can get back where their resting place was as quickly and efficiently as possible. I have a very excellent group of employees helping him.
The most difficult phase of the recovery has been identifying the caskets. Calcasieu Parish Coroner Zeb Johnson explains the process.
There are a lot of different ways to identify the bodies. Fortunately for us, most of the bodies that come out of the graves and are out of the vaults, casketed remains, had memory tubes, and the memory tubes had been completed by the funeral homes. So all we really had to do is take the memory tube out of the casket without opening the casket, and we find the name of the person, the name of the funeral home, the name of the next of kin. So it's allowed us to do what we call 100% positive ID due to the memory tube. In other situations, they were literally in or next to a vault that had the name on them. And if you can see in the cemetery behind us, we have a lot of vaults that are out of the ground, but they still have the markers on top of them. So we're able to identify them that way. And in some cases, in those situations, we were able to take those and just actually put them back in their grave because they were right next to them. There's no point of bringing them in. In some cases, there are no memory tubes, or before the time when they started making memory tubes, they're putting them in the 50s, late 50s and early 60s, and before it became a law in 2006, we would have to take the bodies out of the casket and look for physical identifiers. And these identifiers could be pictures, they could be rosary beads, they could be articles of clothing, they could be bracelets, rings, jewelry, pacemakers, and hip and knee implants, all different types of things, which would cause us to physically become involved with the human remains. And if all else fails, in a localized situation like this, knowing what cemetery they came from, it ends up a lot of times just being the process of elimination. We've identified everybody else, but we've identified this person by the color of the casket they were in, the location they were in, the cemetery, and then is it male or female? So that becomes a process of elimination. The least desirable of those things, but still a very accurate identifier. It seems very easy because if we have 80% of the caskets, we're going to end up with about 110 caskets to be able to positively identify. And it seems easy because, hey, we have 80 already identified and we have like 23, I think, now that are unidentified. And everybody says, oh, well, that's easy. But this is a very slow process for those 23. It'll take us much longer to do those 23 by the time we photograph and go through the casket, look for the identifiers and be able to positively identify everybody. So in that process takes a lot of time. If we start returning bodies to the cemetery to be reburied or calling people and say the bodies are ready to be reburied, then we're not able to do our job. Contrary to popular belief, we have a very, very limited staff that are willing to identify, and I know we have a lot of people that are willing to, I'll come down and volunteer, and it's the excitement of doing it, but believe me, it's not easy, nor is it pleasant work. And so it's very, very difficult for us to get qualified forensic experts to help us do the identification. So that becomes a very slow process. And we want to get everybody identified because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we've got everybody where they need to go. And I know everybody gets impatient and they want to get this over. Unfortunately, we had a meeting yesterday, and I want to tell you, I know these guys they work with us. We've had great help with the prisoners, with the Department of Corrections, from Sheriff Mancuso and his staff. They've done great, and the prisoners have been unbelievably excellent, very respectful of the bodies, very happy to be returning something to the community. And so they've helped us. But the key has been these parish workers out here that didn't know anything about caskets or doing things. And in the last 2 weeks, they have turned this program around. The ideal situation has come to fruition. Getting the cemeteries ready to accept these bodies is the key part of it. And it is very, very difficult to call a family and say, now you need to go to the funeral home, tell the funeral home that you're ready to rebury. The funeral home has to come out and decide whether they're going to need a vault, whether they need it open or closed. They're going to need to know whether they need a new vault, whether they need a new casket. We know what they need, but every family can't do that. It makes more sense for us to get the cemeteries ready to receive these remains, and if we do that, in one day we can call everybody and say, hey, tomorrow we're going to BFW Cemetery where we're standing today, or we're going Fountain Cemetery where we spent the morning, or Niblets Bluff Cemetery tomorrow, and we're going to rebury your loved one, and we give them the names of the ones they're going to rebury. The process goes much faster, rather than just burying one a day, two a day, which would take us a process of a year. We have one cemetery company in Lake Charles in this area that to do this work, and it is overwhelming amount of work. You can see around you we have a complete crew of parish workers here in the Public Works Department, and they have been working since 6:30 this morning out here, and because of that we have reset and repositioned probably 30 vaults to accept reburial. It would take that private company about 2 or 3 months to do the same thing that we've done. So utilizing parish employees, utilizing the staff at the coroner's office, and being able to give them advice on how to do things, I think is going to speed this process up tremendously. Everybody has been so good about helping us. One lady came and just fell to her knees at Fountain Cemetery and started crying because we were able to get her husband's vault repositioned and back in the grave like it was supposed to be, having been upside down since March. And so it makes you feel good that we've been a part of that process.
For the Parish Line, I'm Molly Morgan.
If you would like to help with the recovery efforts, contact the Southwest Louisiana volunteer organizations assisting with disasters at 337-656-0839. Workforce housing is a hot issue in the parish and can sometimes be a bit confusing. Brandon Myers tells us about a new ordinance that will help to define just what workforce housing is.
Worker villages, man camps, workforce housing. We've heard a lot about these terms lately, but there's still confusion about what they actually are. Jennifer Wallace of the Police Jury's Department of Planning and Development explains.
Workforce housing first became a topic of discussion locally back in 2011 when Sasol first made their announcement for their gas to liquids project. And since that time, we've had about $90 billion of investment announced for our region. And something that has always sort of been at the forefront is, where are we going to house all of these people that are coming in for construction and obviously new permanent employees? But because the construction workers are the most urgent need, that's sort of why we're focusing on workforce housing right now.
The workers were coming whether we were ready or not, so the Department of Planning had to adapt to accommodate this new type of housing.
Workforce housing is obviously new to this area. Many of us, me included, had never even heard of this housing type until this economic boom started. Obviously, our zoning ordinance doesn't address it. So basically, the staff started getting requests for this housing type to be constructed, and we had to figure out a way to govern these things and to impose rules and regulations and standards.
So what does the ordinance say about workforce housing?
It's a conglomeration of buildings, because typically what we see in these facilities is a number of dormitory type pods that have the rooms and the bathrooms, and then there's other buildings that consist of offices, security facilities, medical facilities. Many times there's a dining facility and recreational facilities, but it's a bunch of modular type buildings that are moved in as pods and placed on the property. Typically they're temporary in nature, but temporary means different things to different people. So the ordinance says that in this case, temporary means that the timelines of the facility will run in conjunction with the construction timelines. Typically, these workforce housing developers will obtain a contract with a specific contractor, a building company, to house their employees. So that's why we've tried to tie those timelines together. The definition also states that the intent of workforce housing is to minimize impacts on infrastructure. It's to make maximum use of existing water services and sewer services, shuttle busing, so that we only have 50 buses on the road instead of 2,000 cars. So we feel like this is a good solution to what we feel is a temporary problem. We think that this boom may be over in the next 7 to 10 years. So this is a good solution for us to address that dire housing need that we're facing, but not have the long-term blight on the community once those facilities are no longer being used.
Wallace gives us an update on the workforce housing currently approved in Calcasieu Parish.
Keeping in mind that our ordinance only applies to the unincorporated areas of Calcasieu Parish. Thus far, in our jurisdiction, we have 4 approved sites for this type of housing. One is at Southland Field, the airport in Carlos. Another is at the corner of Highway 108 and Reno Road. Then a third one in Ward 4 is located very near the Sasol site off of J. Clofish Road. And then the 4th facility that's been approved locally is at the Vinton Port, which is south of the town of Vinton. At the peak of construction, this area, we will be in dire need of beds for these folks to sleep in. And the current numbers actually put us about 20,000 beds short in 2017. So there is a huge need for us to get people housed.
For the Parish Line, I'm Brandon Myers.
There is still a large unmet need for worker villages in Calcasieu Parish. Officials are hoping that with workforce housing clearly defined, it will expedite the process of approval. New ordinances are in place for defining and regulating solicitors and door-to-door peddlers in the parish. J.P. Booth tells us more.
Item 21, consideration of adopting an ordinance to amend the Code of Ordinances of Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana, relative to peddling.
At its March 24th meeting, the Calcasieu Parish Police Jury updated its Code of Ordinances for door-to-door salesmen and peddling.
Started due to the fact that our ordinance and the city ordinance were much different. And so when law enforcement would try to enforce that ordinance, especially in the unincorporated areas, Ward 3, Moss Bluff, Carlos area, they had two sets of rules that they really had to look at, with the city having the ordinance and the parish having a different one. So with that, we decided to get everybody on the same page and make it easier to enforce it.
I think it's very important that we speak with one voice on this. I think some of the gentlemen or women that are involved in this business, they certainly deserve to have the same regulations between Ward 3 and Calcasieu Parish and Lake Charles. So
the points of emphasis I kind of go by are the hours. That was always a big issue as to what are the hours for peddling. And I want to make sure I got this right, but it's 9 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night you can go door to door. The other one is you have to go to the front door or the main entrance. A major thing that the ordinance now has is that the door-to-door peddlers must go through a federal background check. And then there's certain charges, criminal offenses, that if they have those, then they would not be able to go door to door. If they're on the sex offender registry, any crimes of violence, any theft of property, those type of charges, they can no longer be door-to-door salesmen and get a permit. If they're in violation of the ordinance, which they're coming to the house at 7 o'clock at night, if they're going to the backyard, if they don't have a proper badge identifying themselves, they need to contact 911. And then they will send a unit out there and look into it. And so a lot of folks really want to say, look, we just don't want peddling. Well, you can't stop peddling across the board because the Supreme Court has ruled on many occasions that you can set parameters, but you cannot outlaw it across the board. So if a person does not want a solicitor at the front door, we have come up with some stickers. They're 2x5 stickers that say no solicitors. And if you post those on your door, and the person comes to the door, and if he sees that, then he must walk away. Those stickers can be picked up at our planning department office, or Moss Bluff Library, or Sulphur Library.
For the Parish Line, I'm J.P. Booth.
You can pick up your no soliciting stickers at the Parish Planning Department's offices at 901 Lakeshore Drive or at the Moss Bluff and Sulphur Libraries. The parish has unveiled a new and innovative transportation initiative that will have the police jury funding and managing road construction projects on state routes in the parish. Parish engineer Tim Connors says that with state funding tight and huge growth here, it was up to local officials to fill the gap.
With all of the growth going on in the parish, we've realized that there's a need, especially on our arterial routes, where the majority of the traffic travels. These are our main routes, which also happen to be DOTD routes as well, our state routes. And because of the financial situation the state's in, we realized that for us to see any improvements, some additional capacity, that locals are going to have to step up and try to fill that gap. I sat down with DOTD, our district office here locally, and we looked at a number of projects. And we also utilized our 2014 Master Transportation Plan, the regional plan also that was created by CSRS, part of the Sasol project for our area. And there were a lot of similarities as far as where the needs were at. And these were also showing some needs on the state routes.
The police jury is paying the state portion. Connor says this is an unusual arrangement and some details are still to be determined.
Typically, it would be a federal and state funding. So what we're going to have to do is fill in that gap. So it would be still federal money involved, but there may not be any state money involved, and so we would have to fill in the gap on the state portion of this. Normally, the state would do the bidding and handle the construction, and that's probably the direction we're going to go when we get to that point. Once the design is completed, we'll let them handle the construction part of this. But that's all going to be part of our conversation with them so that we can do what we can to move these projects along as fast as we can.
Here's a list of the 5 projects selected as part of the Parish Transportation Initiative so far.
One of the projects that we're looking at is north of Sulphur. It's the LA 27 arterial highway. And that project limits are from Lewis Street going north to about High Hope Road. The second project that we're looking at would be 27 south of Sulphur and 1256. And both of these projects would entail, it would be a 4-lane roadway with a median dividing the 4 lanes. LA 27 to the south would be approximately from the interstate going south to 108. And so that would be the limits there. On the other side of the parish at Highway 171, we would be looking basically from Broad Street going north to about where the Walmart Center is, just south of the bridge. And that would entail adding additional widening on the east side of 171 to continue that 3rd lane from about Lynn Street going north to Walmart. Then we would also upgrade the signalization there, which would, utilizing today's technology, we believe we can move vehicles through there, queuing those vehicles through that corridor more efficiently when we have the technology that's available to allow the signal to adjust its timing based on the vehicles coming through the signal. And then it would readjust the timing back down once the peak queue has entered through that corridor, usually in the morning and the afternoon. The other project that we're looking at is Country Club Road. Currently, right now, DOTD is looking at Stage 0, which is the very beginning, which is the feasibility of widening Country Club from Big Lake Road all the way around to McNee Street. Since Cove Lane has opened up, Preon Lake Road has become heavily traveled, which the city and the parish are working together on widening the Preon Lake Road. But we feel like there's a portion of Country Club that should be our first priority, and that is between Big Lake Road and Isles Road. This is where a lot of the plant expansions south on the Big Lake Road are occurring, and we want to make sure that this particular part of Country Club Road would get priority, since this would be heavily traveled by a lot of folks going to work down in that area. So the other project is the piece of highway between Westlake and Moss Bluff. And that would also entail widening and probably some realignment there. But that brings a lot of traffic from the northern part of the parish down into the heart of the parish, where a lot of the industrial growth is going on around the Sasol plant. So you've got 5 lanes on both ends of this particular area, and it just makes sense to take the existing 2-lane and widen that out to a 5-lane, and it's needed. We've already completed a Stage 0. The next stage would be the environmental assessment, and so hopefully we'll be able to move forward on that if we can put some local money in the project.
Connors says the Parish Transportation Initiative is an innovative program, and he complimented the police jury and staff for their vision.
This is really visionary on the part of the parish. The police jurors have looked at this, and they understand the need. And again, you know, these roads are not our responsibility, but we recognize the problem. We have to drive them every day. And with the economic growth that's occurring in the area, and hopefully the additional revenues that we would expect, we can take some of that money and put it on some of these roads that will hopefully relieve some of the congestion and the problems that we're feeling currently. And they're only going to get worse as we continue to develop, unless we step in and start making some improvements.
That's our April edition of the Parish Line. Thanks for watching. If you need more information on any of these stories, please visit our website at cppj.net.